Hello and welcome back to Like Maria. This is the second of our videos on context for J.B.Priestley's and Inspector Calls. I'm going to look today at the role of women in society in the early part of the 20th century and the mid-20th century. So hopefully today you'll understand a little bit more about the context of women in an Inspector Calls, just like Maria. The role of women. There again, very important to think about Priestley writing in 1945 and setting the play in 1912. In 1912, women did not have the vote. Even every man did not have the vote. Women were bound by lots of laws once they had got married. Women were not allowed to get mortgages and own certain types of property. There were all sorts of restrictions surrounding education, legally some of these restrictions, but also culturally. So early on in the century, women were seen as homemakers. They had to get married, have children and look after the men, and they were supposed to be not very clever. That was why people wouldn't give them the vote. They were not supposed to be intellectually capable of voting, and men regarded them basically as not being very clever, and women who spoke out and put their point of opinion across were often demeaned and suppressed. Now, by the time Priestley is actually writing this play, we have had 2 world wars, and the world wars did help enhance women's role in society, because of course women kind of took over the running of the country at a very basic level. They started being able to work in factories. They were required in the Second World War to work in munitions factories and to work the land in ways that they had never been allowed to do before. They were forced into this position, and many women felt rather empowered by this. By the time Priestley is writing, all women had the vote. They had parity with men in that regard. So we've moved to a different era. I think Priestley here is really stressing that perhaps women haven't become quite as liberated as society might have thought, and that there is still plenty of work to be done. And the way he picks this out, I think, is particular in the highlighting of the idea that Sheila is somehow part of a kind of business contract between the Crofts and the Burlings. And this is clearly, in our modern day attitudes, a very poor thing, that the 2 businesses are being brought together and cemented together through this marriage, rather than through true affection, etc. And clearly I think Burling is hoping for a little bit of prestige in being using his daughter to access the Crofts business. So this is very distasteful, certainly from our opinion now, but would have been very common in 1912. No one really would have raised an eyebrow at this, and in fact it would probably have been expected. I think the other big thing that he does here is contrast between Sheila's very comfortable life, her clothes, her engagement ring. She's the woman that is going into the shop to buy the clothes, and contrast her with Eva and how her life begins to deteriorate because of rather a nasty, spiteful thing that Sheila does. So there's a big contrast between those 2 girls, and I think Priestley is really highlighting the plight of women who are not given support and who are less fortunate than the comfortable Sheila. Another rather sort of unpleasant, I find, moment in the play is when Sheila is reporting the circumstances of her shopping spree, and she mentions to Gerald that she was buying the clothes for his benefit. And of course that's a really, from today's perspective, for a woman to say that is perhaps demeaning herself in front of a man. However, in those days, of course, it was seen to be, yes, that's what you did. You went out and you dressed for the men, because that's the way you caught a good man or pleasured a good man. So I think we have to be very aware here that the early part of the 20th century had these demeaning attitudes towards women. They were sometimes used in kind of a business context, and they were certainly told to pipe down and not say anything. And what you will notice throughout the play is that Sheila tries to say things, tries to express her opinions, tries to perhaps point out the flaws in the family's way of behaving towards the inspector, and she is very often shut down. So that is typical behaviour for that period. So there we have a little introduction. I hope that you've understood this context and you'll be able to use it now, just like Maria.